This is AM Agenda. Thanks for your company this morning. Joining me now from Melbourne, Liberal frontbencher Senator Mitch Fifield, and in Adelaide, Labor MP Nick Champion. Gents, good to see you both. Nick, on the Redfern speech, 20 years on, you heard what Christopher Pyne had to say there, important in terms of the journey to reconciliation in his view, also the view shared by Noel Pearson, but obviously a great more to be done in this area. Do you think that our nation's leadership is suitably focused on the area of Indigenous recognition and more broadly improving the lot of Indigenous people?
Well, look, Keating's speech was a courageous speech and an important speech, and I think you can track that speech to the later apology, and I think Christopher gave a pretty good and a generous summation of what's gone on over the last 20 years. Clearly we do have to work at closing the gap, and clearly I think the other symbolic thing that needs to be done is that we need to recognise our Indigenous peoples in our Constitution, and that's something that work is going on in the ground amongst communities out there around the place to try and get a consensus up about how we might best do that. So I think constitutional recognition and, of course, practical action on the ground.
Senator Fifield, your thoughts? Obviously, the combination of the two have, and the priority given to either practical focus and the symbolic recognition, it has certainly wavered and been at different levels over the years depending on who is in government. But what's your sense of the way that this has been managed? Obviously a great deal more to be done to deal with Indigenous disadvantage.
Look, symbols are important, and the important thing with the Redfern speech was really how Indigenous Australians received it, and clearly from their reaction there were things that needed to be said that they wanted to hear, and I hope that we can get beyond the squabble between Paul Keating and Don Watson. What really matters here isn't who said the words themselves, but the fact that they were said by a representative of the Australian government to Indigenous Australians. Symbols are important, but as important are practical measures. We have made progress over the last 20 years in Indigenous health and education, but a lot more needs to be done. There is bipartisan support for that, and as Christopher Pyne said earlier, should we win the next election and Tony Abbott is Prime Minister, we will have a leader of the government who has these issues very close to his heart.
Nick Champion, let's move on. I want to talk about this issue of automatic electoral enrolment. You've heard the Manager of Opposition Business, Christopher Pyne, suggest it's Labor rorting the system. Why not have people, if they want to vote, have to show identification to get on the roll in the first place?
Well, look, let's take the starting point as being, is there any electoral fraud in Australia? And of course, there is absolutely no sign of any electoral fraud of any significance in Australia. I think if you're going to have compulsory voting, and that's a choice the nation made very early in the last century, that we were going to have compulsory voting, and if you're going to have it, then it makes sense to have automatic enrolment. And this automatic enrolment, as I understand, is done off data that's kept in various government agencies and the like, and I think we can trust that data. I don't think there's any electoral fraud of any significance in this country, and I don't think anybody's trying to rort the roll, as Christopher Pyne sort of rather excitedly said. All we're trying to do is make sure that those who are eligible to vote get the opportunity to vote, and if one was going to be partisan, we might say that it's been a feature of Conservative politics, not just here but around the world, that what they want to do is, cleanse the roll of people who don't vote for them. They're always trying to knock out people who move.
That's not something.
They're always trying to knock off the youth vote.
That's not something isolated to Conservative parties. Obviously, it's in Labor's best interest to get more younger voters on the roll.
Well, what we believe is that if you're going to have compulsory voting, then you've got to make sure that everybody who is eligible to vote has an opportunity to vote. I mean, that's the feature of it. That's the whole dynamic of the system. what the coalition, I think, seeks to do over time is to make sure people are slowly cut off the roll, or that particular groups don't get on the roll in the first place. So, you know, I think we'd be better off, I suppose, if we didn't have such partisan bickering about it. But if we are going to have it, then obviously I'll point out the coalition's flaws.
But Senator Fifield, given the starting point that that Nick Champion referred to there, that there is no rorting of the roll in this country, that you've got the various government agencies who know individuals coming onto the roll at the age of 18, it would be fairly easy to monitor, wouldn't it, with a suitably empowered electoral commission?
Well, I think the change in the legislation actually undermines the integrity of our electoral rolls. Yes, we know that whenever Labor put forward changes to electoral law, it's with their own electoral advantage in mind. But just as we expect people to pay their taxes, we expect people to make sure that they have a valid driver's licence, we expect people to ensure that they are enrolled to vote. And when you have that requirement that people actually take the effort themselves to enrol to vote, you reduce the risk of there being mistakes, which are much more likely when you have a system of automatic enrolment. So I think the system as it was more robust. But look, we're not going to get hung up. The electoral laws are as they are. They are as the Parliament has determined, and we're just going to get on with fighting the next election on those laws.
I want to move on now, if I can. So two issues in a sense. The focus on the budget surplus. The Business Council of Australia saying the government needs to look at a medium-term plan now, a more realistic plan to return to the budget to the black. Senator Fifield, I put this to Christopher Pyne as well. Given your commitment, for example, to multi-billion-dollar initiatives like the Disability Insurance Scheme and other measures, and given the state of the books, isn't it important that the coalition also revise its promise to return to surplus as soon as you return to government? It's just not going to be possible, is it?
Oh, look, Kieran, I think it's important that we don't verbal the Business Council here. They weren't saying that this budget should not get back into surplus. They were not saying that the current government should not get the budget back into surplus. What they were saying was that they don't believe the assumptions underlying the current government's budget forecasts. What they were saying was that in order to get the budget back into surplus, you actually need a plan, and they don't believe that the current government has a plan. The Business Council weren't saying they're against a surplus in this financial year, so I think we've got to be clear about that. Our plan in relation to a budget surplus and an NDIS is to work towards both of those at the same time. The Productivity Commission, as you know, have a target date for implementation of the NDIS of 2018-19. We aim to be back in strong surplus well before then, and our view is that you can work towards both an NDIS and a budget surplus at the same time. An NDIS isn't the enemy of a budget surplus, and a budget surplus isn't the enemy of an NDIS.
Well, that's in the longer term, Nick Champion. In the shorter term, commodity prices continue to fall off. Most economists now saying that this wafer-thin projected surplus is just not going to happen on current numbers. Is it time for Treasurer Swan to concede the reality? There has been some shifting rhetoric, but it just seems that further cuts would damage an already softening economy now.
Well, look, I think you've got to look at the government's overall economic record, which has been good. We've kept the economy growing throughout the period of the global financial crisis, and all of the shocks that have come after that, and the latest commodity prices are just a feature of that. We do have a fair bit of, if you like, ongoing uncertainty in the rest of the world, the transition of the Chinese leadership, the problems of Europe, the issues of the fiscal cliff in America, and those issues all have to be sorted out. That obviously has some effect on world economic growth, and that has some effect on how the economy grows at home. But we've had economic growth throughout our period. We've had low unemployment, low inflation, low interest rates over this period. Australians have every reason to be confident, and this government has, as we've worked through this period, prioritised, prioritised things so that we could run a surplus and that we could keep pressure, downward pressure on interest rates.
But do you still think it's realistic? Surely not.
Well, in the past we've been able to make significant spending cuts on by simply making
It'd be counterproductive now, though, wouldn't it?
Well, we've made some fairly tough decisions around things like the private healthcare rebate and other things, which have had significant budgetary outcomes. Been significant spending cuts and helped, in achieving the outcomes that I talked about before. I think it's too early to give up on a budget surplus. I think we should endeavour to get one. I think it's been a good discipline for the government, and I think aligned with all those other successful features of the Australian economy. It means that Australia stands as a beacon of the world of growth, of low unemployment, low inflation, low interest rates and certainty, and that's why we have the central banks of other nations investing in our dollar.
Nick Champion and Senator Mitch Fifield, we're out of time this morning. Thanks both for